The night Lena Marsh was publicly humiliated in front of 400 people, she was wearing her mother's pearls. She hadn't wanted to attend the Whitmore Foundation gala at all. The invitation had come through her firm, Aldridge & Cole, one of the oldest financial consulting firms in Boston, because Lena was the one who had spent 11 months restructuring the Whitmore family's portfolio after their patriarch's death left it in ruins. She had turned a $40 million liability into a $62 million recovery. She had done it quietly, methodically, working weekends and skipping lunches, eating granola bars at her desk while her colleagues went out for steak. Her reward, apparently, was an invitation to watch those same colleagues celebrate without her. She almost didn't go. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror for a long time that evening, looking at herself in the dark emerald dress she'd bought 3 years ago and never worn. She was 31 years old, 5'4", and built the way her mother called substantial, and the world called something far less kind. Her hair was dark and curly and refused to be entirely tamed. Her eyes were sharp and brown, and had a habit of seeing through people, which most people found unsettling. She clipped on her mother's pearls, picked up her clutch, and went. The grand ballroom of the Hargrove Hotel was everything she expected. Marble floors, chandelier light that made everyone look like they were inside a champagne bubble, waitstaff moving through the crowd with the synchronized efficiency of a well-rehearsed performance. Lena accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and found a spot near the tall windows overlooking the harbor where she could watch the room without being required to participate in it. She was good at that. Watching. She had been watching for about 20 minutes when Owen Parrish found her. Owen was her boyfriend of 2 years, or had been until approximately 30 seconds after he opened his mouth at the microphone that the event coordinator had just handed him for what Lena assumed was a routine toast. "I want to take a moment," Owen said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the ballroom, the way the voices of men like Owen always did, to make an announcement. Lena turned from the window. He was standing at the center of the room, golden-haired and broad-shouldered, his tuxedo fitting him the way tuxedos fit men who had been built for tuxedos. He was smiling his easy, practiced smile. He had his hand extended toward someone at the edge of the crowd. Stephanie Aldridge, daughter of the firm's senior partner, 26 years old, the kind of thin that fashion magazines called effortless, walked toward him in a dress the color of blush roses. "Stephanie has made me the happiest man in this room," Owen said, "and I'd like everyone here to be the first to know that she's agreed to marry me." The room responded the way rooms always respond to these things, with applause, with laughter, with the tinkling of glasses raised in sudden delighted approval. Lena stood very still. She was aware, in a distant, clinical way, of several things simultaneously. She was aware that the pearls around her neck suddenly felt very tight. She was aware that a woman to her left, someone she vaguely recognized from the Whitmore team, had noticed her and was watching her face with the particular hungry attention of a person waiting to witness a scene. She was aware that Owen had not looked in her direction once. She set her glass down on the windowsill with great care. She was not going to give anyone a scene. She was nearly to the door when she heard his voice. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, delivered quietly, from just behind her left shoulder, in a voice that had the unhurried quality of a man who had never once been told that his timing was inconvenient. She turned. The man standing behind her was not anyone she recognized, which was unusual, because Lena made it her business to know everyone in a room. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the kind that men exaggerated by an inch or two, with dark hair going slightly silver at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been assembled from a combination of sharp angles and deliberate calm. His suit was charcoal and impeccably cut, and he wore it the way very few men wore expensive things, as if he had simply put it on and never thought about it again. His eyes were a gray so pale they were almost colorless in the chandelier light, and they were watching her with an attention that felt different from the woman by the window. Less hungry, more careful. I am, she said. The Whitmore recovery, he said, stopped walking. I'm sorry, 11 months, 40 million in debt, restructured into 62 million in net assets. He tilted his head slightly. I read the report. I was curious who had done it. The name on the filing was Aldridge and Cole, but names on filings are rarely the whole story. She looked at him for a moment. Who are you? Callum Voss. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Callum Voss did not attend galas. Callum Voss did not stand near windows, making conversation with financial consultants. Callum Voss was the kind of name that appeared in the financial press only when something very large had shifted, an acquisition, a collapse, a restructuring that changed the shape of an entire industry. He was 43 years old, she knew from memory, because she had studied every major player in Boston finance the way other people studied maps before a road trip. Not because she expected to meet them, but because she wanted to know exactly where everything was. He controlled 4 holding companies across 3 countries. He had rebuilt his family's construction empire into something that bore almost no resemblance to construction anymore. He had a reputation for being precise, demanding, and almost entirely indifferent to what other people thought of him. He was watching her the way she watched rooms. Lena Marsh, she said, because there was no point pretending. I know. He glanced, very briefly, in the direction of the microphone where Owen's voice was still carrying across the ballroom. He's a fool. That's not your business, no? No, he agreed easily. It isn't. He paused. I have a proposition for you, Miss Marsh. Not tonight, but I'd like you to hear it. She looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, she could hear the crowd applauding again. She thought about the granola bars. She thought about 11 months of weekends. She thought about the woman by the window waiting to see her fall apart. Give me your card, she said. She did not call him for 4 days. On the first day, she went to work and sat at her desk and did not look at Owen Parrish's empty chair, because he had taken a personal day, presumably to celebrate his engagement with Stephanie Aldridge, in whatever way recently engaged people celebrated. She answered 46 emails. She ate a sandwich at her desk. She did not cry. On the second day, she tendered her resignation to HR, citing a conflict of professional interests, which was both technically vague and entirely true. She cleaned out her desk between meetings so that no one would have to watch. She left the building at 6:15 with a box that weighed almost nothing, because she had never kept personal things at work. On the third day, she sat in her apartment and thought very clearly about what she had, what she didn't have, and what she intended to do about the distance between those 2 things. On the 4th day, she called Callum Voss. He answered on the second ring. Which Lena Marsh, he said. You said you had a proposition. I did. A brief pause. Dinner tonight, if you're available. She was available. She had, at that particular moment, nothing but availability. The restaurant he chose was not the kind of place where people went to be seen. It was quiet and small, and tucked into the back of a building on Newbury Street that looked, from the outside, like it might be a very exclusive library. The maitre knew Callum by name and led them to a corner table that felt like a room within a room. Lena ordered the salmon. Callum ordered nothing, and then, when the waiter looked confused, ordered a whiskey and the lamb. You resigned, he said, when they were settled. How do you know that? I know things. He said it without apology or elaboration, the way people stated facts about weather. It was unnecessary. You were the most valuable person in that firm. Valuable things can still be in the wrong place. She unfolded her napkin. What's the proposition, Mr. Voss? Callum. He looked at her steadily. I'm acquiring a company, Hargrove Medical Devices. You may know it. She did. Everyone in Boston finance knew it. Hargrove Medical was a mid-sized manufacturer with 2 extraordinarily valuable structures held together, as far as Lena had been able to tell from the public filings, with what appeared to be optimism and rubber bands. There had been rumors of a sale for months. Several larger firms had circled and retreated. The acquisition itself is straightforward, Callum continued. What isn't straightforward is the board. There are 6 members. 3 will vote with me, automatically. 1. He paused. 1 will vote against me regardless of the financial merits, because he has been promised a better offer by my competitor. A man named Sterling Price, she repeated, who's been trying to absorb Hargrove for 18 months. Callum looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise but was in that neighborhood. Yes. And the board member who's committed to Price. Arthur Whitmore III. She set down her fork. Arthur Whitmore III was the eldest son of the patriarch, whose estate she had spent 11 months rescuing. He had not been involved in the restructuring because he had been, at the time, living in Monaco with his 3rd wife and an attitude toward family finances that could most charitably be described as detached. He had inherited a meaningful percentage of the Whitmore holdings once the estate was settled, and had immediately begun doing with those holdings exactly the kinds of things Lena had spent almost a year undoing. "You want me to analyze the deal," she said. "I want you to do more than that." He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone choosing words not because they were uncertain, but because they were precise. "I am proposing that you join Voss Group, not as a consultant, as head of acquisitions." She looked at him. "I've never held an executive position. I know, you've been doing executive work for other people's names. There's a difference." He turned his whiskey glass on the tablecloth. "I've watched the Whitmore work for months. The decisions you made, not the ones in the filing, but the ones beneath the filing, the choices about sequence and timing and which assets to move in what order. Those aren't the decisions of a consultant executing a brief. They're the decisions of someone who thinks 3 steps ahead as a reflex." The salmon was excellent. She noticed this distantly. "Why does any of this require dinner?" she asked. "You could have sent an offer letter." "I could have," he said. "But an offer letter wouldn't have told me what I needed to know." "Which is," his pale eyes held hers across the table, "whether you'd take it." She took it. She spent the first 6 weeks at Voss Group learning the architecture of something that was far larger and more complex than she had initially understood. The holding companies were just the visible surface. Beneath them were subsidiary networks, investment vehicles, long-term contracts with municipalities and energy providers, and 3 different technology firms in South Korea. Callum had built the whole thing over 15 years, with the methodical patience of someone who was playing a very long game, and he had built it so well that it ran largely on its own, which meant that when he decided to add Hargrove Medical to it, he needed someone who could handle the surgery without destabilizing the patient. Lena was that person. She had always known she was that person. She had spent 5 years being that person for other people's credit, and the particular relief of doing it for her own name was something she had not fully anticipated. She and Callum worked well together in the specific way that 2 people work well together when they are both constitutionally incapable of wasting each other's time. Meetings lasted as long as they needed to, and no longer. He asked precise questions and expected precise answers, and did not perform interest he didn't feel or patience he wasn't planning to exercise. She discovered over those first weeks that this was among the rarer qualities in any person, and considerably rarer in a man of his particular standing. He also had a habit of leaving coffee on her desk at 7 in the morning, always from the same place on Beacon Street, always black, always with a small sticky note that said only whatever he thought she'd be working on first that morning. One Tuesday she arrived to find a cup with a note that read Whitmore, 3rd board meeting Thursday, and discovered she had already been thinking exactly that. She didn't mention the coffee, neither did he. Arthur Whitmore III was not an intelligent man, but he was a strategic one in the narrow way that people who have always had resources become strategic. He knew the value of leverage, even when he couldn't always articulate why. He was holding his vote because Sterling Price had promised him a seat on the Hargrove board post-acquisition, a seat that carried both prestige and a salary that would allow Arthur to continue funding the lifestyle that the Monaco divorce had significantly damaged. Lena spent 3 weeks mapping his position the way you map terrain before a long march, not just where he was standing, but why, and what would need to shift for him to consider moving. She found it on a Tuesday afternoon in a quarterly filing from 2019. Arthur Whitmore III had a minority stake in a real estate development company called Crestline Partners. Crestline Partners had, 5 months ago, finalized a contract with the city of Boston for a mixed-use development on the South End waterfront, a contract worth, at projected completion, approximately $90 million. It was a good contract. It was also a contract that was currently 40 days from triggering an insurance clause that would result in a significant penalty if construction hadn't broken ground. Construction had not broken ground. She walked into Callum's office at 4:15 on a Tuesday and put the filing on his desk. He read it in silence. Then he looked up at her. "Crestline is behind," she said. "They need capital to move. Without it, they miss the threshold. They trigger the penalty, and Arthur's stake becomes a significant liability instead of an asset." She sat down across from him. "But if a third party, say an investment vehicle with existing relationships in Boston construction, were to offer a bridge loan to Crestline on favorable terms, Arthur's position is protected. His South End stake recovers. And Arthur, who is ultimately a man who votes his own interest, suddenly finds that his interest and our interest have become the same thing." Callum looked at her for a long moment. "How long did it take you to find this?" he said. 3 weeks. The previous firm I hired for this spent 8 months on Arthur Whitmore and came back with nothing. They were looking for leverage," she said. "I was looking for alignment. They're different things." He was quiet again. That particular quiet that she had learned, over 6 weeks, meant he was not hesitating but processing, arriving somewhere he had already intended to go in his own time. "Do it," he said. The Hargrove board vote took place on a Thursday morning in a conference room on the 41st floor of a building downtown, with a view of the harbour that Lena did not look at once. She sat 3 seats from Callum on the same side of the table and watched the faces of the 6 board members with the particular focused calm of a person who has done everything that can be done and is now simply watching the work hold. Arthur Whitmore III arrived 8 minutes late, which was something people did when they wanted the room to notice their arrival. He settled into his chair, straightened his cuffs, and looked around the table with the expression of a man who expected deference. His eyes moved to Lena. He had met her once, 2 years ago, at a family dinner following the estate restructuring. He had not remembered her name at the time. He did not appear to remember her face now. She was, to him, the kind of person who wasn't there until they were. She watched him not see her and thought about Owen Parrish's hand, extended toward Stephanie Aldridge in a ballroom full of chandelier light. She thought, "That's all right, he'll see me in a moment." The vote went 4-2 in favor of Voss Group's acquisition. Arthur Whitmore III voted in favor. The 2 opposing votes came from board members who had structural conflicts the deal couldn't resolve, and they had been expected. When it was over, Arthur stood and crossed to Callum's side of the table. He shook Callum's hand warmly, said something about looking forward to the partnership, and then his eyes tracked sideways to Lena, finally arriving at her the way eyes arrive at things that have been there all along. "The Whitmore estate restructuring," he said slowly, as though a memory were organizing itself in real time. "You were the one who—" "Yes," she said pleasantly. "I was." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He chose, in the end, not to say whatever he had been about to say, and shook her hand instead, briefly, with the manner of a man who had just understood that the landscape had shifted in ways he hadn't fully tracked. She smiled. She had a very good smile when she chose to deploy it. The Crestline arrangement had a secondary consequence that Lena had calculated but hadn't mentioned in Callum's office, because it was not the kind of thing she was prepared to put in a business context without being certain about the shape of it. Owen Parrish, as it turned out, was a junior partner at the law firm that handled Crestline's municipal contracts. She had known this when she found the Crestline filing. She had considered it for exactly 20 minutes and then set it aside because including it in her pitch to Callum would have muddied a clean argument with something personal, and she didn't do that. She had fixed the Whitmore problem and the Hargrove problem on their own merits, and the fact that it also put her professionally in a position of unmistakable consequence relative to a man who had stood at a microphone and pretended she didn't exist. That was incidental. She told herself that for approximately 3 weeks after the vote, then on a Wednesday evening when she and Callum were working late in the conference room on the Hargrove integration timeline, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Owen. I need to talk to you about the Crestline situation. Are you involved with Voss Group?" She read the text once, set her phone face down on the table, and returned to the integration timeline without changing her expression. Callum across the table did not look up from the document he was reading. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said. And then, after a moment, "Owen Parrish." Callum set down his document. She told him about the text. She told him about the law firm and the Crestline contract. She told him, in the same tone she used for financial analysis, that she had not included the Owen element in her pitch to him because it was personal and therefore beside the point. Callum was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do about it?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "It takes care of itself. If Crestline completes on time, Owen's firm keeps the municipal contract, and he never needs to understand what happened or who made it happen, if he does understand." She paused. "That's also fine. He'll figure it out eventually, yes. And Stephanie Aldridge's father," Callum said, "is the senior partner at the firm where you spent 5 years doing work that was filed under other people's names." She looked at him. "I pay attention," he said simply. The conference room was quiet. Outside the windows, the city did what cities do at 9 in the evening in late November. It glittered indifferent and absolute, full of all the things that had happened and all the things that were about to. "My mother's pearls," Lena said, unexpectedly, and then wasn't sure why she'd said it. Callum waited. "At the gala." "When Owen made the announcement, I was wearing my mother's pearls, and I thought she would have been so angry." She shook her head slightly. "Not at Owen, at me. For being somewhere I'd made myself small enough to fit." The silence after that was different from the other silences she'd catalogued in 6 weeks of working alongside him. "You're not small," Callum said. He said it the same way he said everything, without performance, without the slightly elevated quality that crept into people's voices when they were trying to comfort. He said it the way he said the Whitmore recovery was your work in a hotel ballroom, as a statement of observed fact. "You were never small. You were in a room that made you pretend you were." She looked at him across the conference table, across the integration timeline and the legal documents and the 6 weeks of black coffee and sticky notes, and work that had, against every expectation she'd had walking into a restaurant on Newbury Street, turned out to feel like the first true thing she had done in years. "The coffee," she said, "in the mornings. I didn't want you starting the day behind," he said. His voice was still even, but something in his expression had shifted, very slightly, the way the quality of light shifts in a room when a door opens somewhere else in the building. Callum. Lena. They stayed like that for a moment, across the table in the conference room on the 41st floor, with the city behind the windows and the work between them that was, as of approximately 45 minutes ago, finished for the evening. "I should mention," he said, "that I knew you weren't going to be in that firm much longer. Before the gala, I'd been looking for a reason to approach you professionally for several months." She looked at him. "The gala was the reason. The gala was the timing," he said. "You were already the reason." Sterling Price made one more attempt. He contacted Arthur Whitmore III, who was, by that point, committed to the Voss acquisition and had been since the Thursday board vote, and offered him a substantially improved seat on a different board. a preemptive position on a new Price Holdings medical subsidiary that was designed transparently to compete directly with the Hargrove acquisition. It was a good offer, and it might have worked if Arthur had still had leverage. Arthur did not still have leverage. Arthur's South End stake was healthy. His relationship with the Voss portfolio was already generating returns he hadn't projected, and he called Callum's office to report Price's attempt on the same afternoon he received it, with the slightly sheepish quality of a man who wants credit for a loyalty he is only now choosing. Callum thanked him graciously and passed the information to the legal team. Sterling Price withdrew from the Hargrove space entirely 6 weeks later. The press release cited strategic reprioritization. The financial press noted that a simultaneous move by Voss Group's legal representatives to file a formal complaint regarding Price's interference in a completed board process had not helped his position. The complaint had been Lena's idea. She had not needed to propose it forcefully. She had simply put it on Callum's desk on a Monday morning next to a cup of coffee from Beacon Street, a cup she had brought him for the first time because she had gotten there first that day. His note, when he found it, had said, "Nice." She had laughed, genuinely, out loud, alone in the office at 7:15 in the morning, and the sound had surprised her, and she had thought, that's what it sounds like when you're not making yourself small. Owen Parrish called once. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was long and had the quality of a man who was attempting several things at once. Apology, information gathering, and a kind of retroactive recalculation of Lena's value that was both too late and not the point. She did not return the call. She heard, through a secondary channel, that Stephanie Aldridge had ended the engagement 4 months later, citing irreconcilable differences, which, in the vocabulary of women who had once watched Lena Marsh walk toward the exit of a hotel ballroom while trying not to show on her face what was happening inside her chest, meant something more specific that Lena chose not to examine too closely. She did not feel triumphant about it. She had not wanted Owen to be unhappy. She had simply wanted to stop being the person who was small in someone else's room. She had done that. The Hargrove medical integration was complete by the following spring. Lena presented the final report to the full Voss Group board, 12 people, around a table that was larger than most of the offices she'd worked in a building with her name on the door of an office on the 41st floor that looked out over the harbour, and was, she had come to understand, permanent. She was 32 years old. She was wearing a dress the colour of deep burgundy and her mother's pearls, because some things you kept and some things you changed, and wisdom was knowing which was which. Callum sat at the head of the table and did not look at her with the particular pride-adjacent expression she had seen other men deploy when they wanted credit for a woman's success. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with attention, with precision, with the focused quality of a person who had known what they were looking at for a long time and intended to keep looking. When the presentation was over and the board had asked their questions and the room had emptied, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the bar cart in the corner and set one in front of her. 47 million in projected year 1 returns, she said. Yes, he said, I was conservative in the estimate. I know. He sat down across from her. You always are, and you're always right. She looked at him across the table. Across the city, she was finally standing in the way she had always intended to stand in it. Squarely, without apology, without making herself the size that fit other people's definitions of what she was supposed to be. Callum, she said. Lena, he said, and his voice had the quality it had in the conference room in late November. Quiet, deliberate, carrying more weight than its volume suggested. She raised her glass. He raised his. Outside the windows, Boston moved the way cities move when they don't know they're being witnessed. Hugely, unceasingly, full of everyone who had ever been told they were not enough and either believed it or decided, one ordinary evening in an extraordinary room, that they were finished believing it. Lena Marsh had decided.